Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is the show where I take a look at every classic Doctor Who story, plus a bunch of Big Finish audio dramas, one episode a day, 7 days a week. And today, on the 31st of July 2019, we're starting to look at the second story in the Gareth Roberts trilogy of novel adaptations, The English Way of Death, once again, adapted by John Dorney. Starting, of course, with part 1. Now, the English Way of Death, like stories like The Antimatter, are sort of that tribute to. It's sort of this tribute to, like, sort of the 1920s and 1930s. The story opens with this nice adaptation of what I believe was the book's prologue. Essentially, on this train, where you have, it's basically this conversation between Terrence Hardiman playing a man called Stackhouse, who is this, he's this big biscuit manufacturer. He does, and this, this sort of alien character, on this train. It's an adaptation. It's this. It's a prologue that you don't necessarily actually need if you're really looking at the book as a whole. It doesn't, not that it doesn't contribute stuff to the story. It just it's a great scene, but it's not entirely necessary. But including it really fleshes out Stackhouse as a character, because when you see him later on in the episode, he is a possessed corpse. Like, he and his butler are possessed corpses decaying. Like, he's become this crazy eccentric. All things that are explained in dialogue that, again, sort of indicating you didn't really need that for the first sort of appearance of Stackhouse as a character. But keeping it gives you this really good introduction to Stackhouse, and this introduction to Percy closed, and just getting the really premise that the first idea that to the audience that Percy, he's not our villain. He's letting people from the future live out in the past, yes, but he's not evil. He's basically doing it to give people a better life. It's really a really nice, a nice sort of opening to the story, where you get this sense of, okay, we're building up these characters, and we're building up this world, and this world is, it's the world of, characters living life, and dealing with their dealing with this, their own, wants and needs, before the Doctor and Romana even show up. And Percy Close is just a fun character. Like, we then see him at a party later, living the high life, kind of doing this interesting thing on The Great Gatsby, where he's telling this story, and the Doctor and Romana arrive. The Doctor turns off the randomizer because I need to return some library books, really showing that he's like, yeah, he's a character who does not like doing the story that is doing a story that is like being completely random. He's really spends a lot of his time just kind of trying to live a life in this very in this very, very new and interesting world, into something that the uh, characters really work at. Um, it's something where you get the real sense that the Doctor, the Doctor and Romana come into this world living. They're trying to figure. They try to do quite a lot of figuring out what the heck is going on. Um, they don't necessarily know everything, but they get you get a little bit of stuff. You get just a little bit of, what the story is, where we're going with the plot, and what the plot is going for. Where the characters are, where the characters are moving, where the story's going. You have this sense of who Stackhouse is, and you don't. It's a great start. It's an amazing start. It's amazingly enjoyable. Because you have this assassin, this female assassin who is a big character and has a big impact on the plot, and is like, yes, I'm is base. She is basically a villain, but she's a villain that's fun, and she gets this comedy professor in. While the Doctor and Romana really only stay on the fringes of things in this first episode, as they are exploring and they're having a lot of fun here as characters. They really do give some great performances. Also, the Doctor and Romana, are really, really good. And K9, you have K9 be like, yeah, Doctor, you're gonna need me, because that's just sort of how it works. And basically the TARDIS is not running at capacity. It's these great jokes, and just these jokes that they come fast and they come hard. And they hit really, really well, really creating just sort of the characters that you enjoy, that you really, really do end up loving. The Doctor and Romana are great. It's just, we build up this great story. So overall, I'm going to give The English Way of Death Part 1 a 10 out of 10. It is the 1st of August 2019, and I just finished listening to Part 2 of The English Way of Death. Now, Part 2 of The English Way of Death works really well on the level that it is a story that is an episode that feels kind of slower, but it isn't actually all that slow of a story. It's not like, oh, we're not actually moving, we're not doing anything with this story. No, there really are, things are being done with the story. It's, it's one of those, really, one of those really, really interesting stories where you get this nice laid back feel, but there's still this ever present danger. There's a lot of exploration in this episode of sort of the zombies and what they really what they sort of mean, as characters. They are, they are basically, they're the servants of different, they're the servants of Zodal, this gaseous cloud living in the corpse of, living in the corpse of Stackhouse, who played by Terrence Hardiman, in what becomes a really interesting, an interesting way that the story sort of builds up. You have, you know, um, it's one of those big, big sort of stories where you get this idea, and this plot coming in and really giving the story something completely new. Like, you have K9 stuck in this basket, the Doctor stuck basically trying to sort of fix himself, sort of. You really don't, it's not like he is, the the most important character. He's one that you get where you get just this sense, this sense that the story is built around this whole character. It's he's a crazy character. He sets his zombies on the Doctor and Romana. Like, a lot of the actual plot progression happens via Romana, sort of building her up as becoming more like the Doctor, getting sort of building on something that happened in the Romance of Crime. Basically, having it like having this idea that the Doctor is kind of has been kind of teaching Romana different things. In teaching Romana, the sort of the ropes, you really see what the what the story really wants is that, what the story really goes through is that the story has has built up Romana. Like, you have her and a specific colonel going out to Nutchurch, basically to close the sort of the time tunnel. And you get this big explanation of what Percy's been doing. The character's name is Percy Closed because he put his names in P closed, and having P closed, you have the big sort of ending with the episode, as you have a lot of this where you just get this romance between him, between Percy and his neighbor that goes on. There's just a lot in this episode, yet it never seems to be too much. It's always sort of just enough. It makes enough sense that you have these characters. This, her name is Felicia Chater. She's a mystery novelist. I guess kind of parodying Agatha Christie, but not really parodying Agatha Christie. you really, you get a lot of the sense of, what's been going on with the story, and you get the sense that things are building up, and you get you just have a really good cast, and really the jokes come quick, and these jokes are really, really good. Um, Basically, and you have the Italian assassin, basically trying to be told to get out as soon as she can because it's not. This isn't a safe place to be. This is, you know, a this isn't something. It's not safe for these characters. It's a scary, scary place, and I think it's something that works. It works really well, as a story, and the English Way of Death Part 2 really, really, really complements things. So overall, I'm going to give the English Way of Death Part 2 another 10 out of 10. It is the 2nd of August 2019, and I just finished listening to Part 3 of the English Way of Death. Part 3 of the English Way of Death is, once again, an excellent episode. You really get a sense of, again, we really get a sense that this story is building up to a conclusion. And as a story, I think that might be down to Gareth Roberts as a writer becoming more experienced in between writing Romance of Crime and English Way of Death, the original novels, because the ending of Romance of Crime felt a bit too, clunky, and a bit on the side of ooh. It kind of fell apart in the last bit, but it really didn't. Whereas English Way of Death is just increasing in intensity. It's building things up, while still giving us time to explore the characters. Percy Close gets captured for a majority of this episode, and is excellent throughout it. Like, he keeps being confused for the Doctor. You know. It's one of those. It's one of those stories where you get this big, this big built, this big built-in, this big built-in story all about, all about, what happened with the Doctors, and and you really have the Doctor getting enjoyed. You have the Doctor trying to get Felicia to explore her emotions and realize she's falling in love with Percy, even if he doesn't really believe it's love. You have Romana and this Colonel going off and having their adventure with the zombies. You have K9 being taken over by Zodal, our big villain, really sort of as a way to show its power, and really giving it a big, making the villain's threat levels increase. The threat level was already really, was already, you know, uh, you know, um, um, you know, the where you have where you have the story with Zodal. We get this idea that, he's a gaseous creature, and there's this great bit where, um, where you really, really have, you have the big, this idea that, they're going to try to reunite him, and that he intends to end the world next Tuesday and make the zombies, let the zombies feed and basically kill everyone, all done in this very, very British, um, uh, but um, but the story just builds up onto, um, builds up into just this English way where, everyone could die. Um, he Zodal doesn't really plan to take over the world; he plans to destroy it. It's this really, interesting build up of stakes. Um, you have, you have the have the stakes of the characters trying to live their lives like they like they should, but but they really, really don't. What else is really, really nice is that you have a story built up around, um, you know built up around the plot. Um, um, you have this idea that the characters are trying to create a uh, create a complete, um, a complete story. You have, just some great stuff here in what really becomes a really good story. It's really funny, really witty. Every character has their own plot line. There are characters I haven't even talked about much. Like, you have, the Italian assassin. You have Woodrow and Spence, who ends up, zombified and part of sort of Zodal in this episode, which is a sad fate for him to really, um, to really, undergo. Genuinely, it's quite sad for the character to, become a zombie. But you have a lot of these characters doing these amazing things, um, and props must be given to John Dorney, who adapted this, because he took a story that, is very visual in many, many ways, and gave it a really, really solid, a solid sense of, a solid version that can be done as a, on audio. It can be performed. Uh, something else that, and Nicholas Briggs brought to life directing, and, even the sort of jaunty tunes, by Jamie Robertson, gives it a completely different feel from Romance of Crime, yet also feels equally like it's celebrating the Douglas Adams era. So I'm going to give The English Way of Death Part 3 another 10 out of 10. Alright, it is the 5th of August 2019, and I just finished listening to Part 4 of The English Way of Death, the concluding episode now. Yes, I know I missed a couple of days, and for that, I apologize. It couldn't be helped. But the final episode of The English Way of Death is great. There's this amazing point where you really get this big, this big ending with, with the characters, um, with where the characters really, um, really get, where you really get a, a big, a big ending. You get this really big ending of the story. You have K9 essentially sacrificing himself to save the Doctor and Ramon, and of course surviving because he's a robot. And you have this sort of very much this very hunky-dory ending where Felicia and Percy go off together and get married, and Harriet and the Colonel go off together and get married. And you have there's a lot of battle scenes here, for lack of a better term, and they are great when you have the actual circle built in, come into the story. Even though they've been pretty much background characters up till this point, you get a really good sense, not only a really good sense of the story, just a really good bit of, fun. There's a lot of fun here, where you really, obviously partially because of just John Dorney's adapting, really making the humor, humor working, um, you know, uh, you know, there's this really big, um, the big story. It's all, a real big conclusion. And you have Zodal. Terrence Hardiman is amazing as the villain because he has one of those voices for it. There's a reason that Big Finish eventually brought him in to play one of their incarnations of Rassilon when they did Time War stories. He's amazing. Now, you also just, and that being said, you also just get a really good sense of, this is what the story is. This is what it's about. These are, you get a really good sense of the characters here, and how the characters really do it. And it's sort of, there's this sort of practical to a fault that this story is English. The English, this sort of English place in the story. You really get a, it feels like this is meant to be like sort of in a quote unquote very English story. And you really get this amazing moment at the end where the Doctor and Ramon leave it, like they turn on the randomizer and they just get right back going because mainly because it's one of those you know it's one of those really, a really big story and a big ending for the plot. It's big, and you have every character really making it out, and you have the Italian assassin who's been in the midst of it sacrificing herself in this amazing way, sort of getting herself. She ends up committing suicide. It's this amazingly dark, contrasted idea, sort of in these very happy surroundings. It's one of those really, really a you know, it's it's a really big you know, it's a really good story. Um, um, it it's a lot. It's a really really good. Um, it's a really uh, it's a really solid story. So overall, I'm going to give The English Way of Death Part 4 another 10 out of 10. That being said, we can average them up to give The English Way of Death a final score of 10 out of 10. Thank you everybody for watching this installment of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. As always, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. And join me next time when we start tackling the second half of Season 17 with The Nightmare of Eden.